Hi, this is Manos Brilakis from the Minneapolis Heart Institute and the Cardiovascular Innovations Foundation. And this is a video different from the usual videos on the manual of PCI or the manual of CTO PCI. It is a video on several lessons that apply to CTO and complex percutaneous coronary intervention that were actually gleaned during a recent backpacking canoeing trip on the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters, for those who are familiar with the area, is an area of wilderness in the Superior National Forest in northern Minnesota at the west of Lake Superior, and is an area of beautiful lakes and forest that are connected with each other either directly through water or through some narrow passages called portages. And these portages is the road from going from one lake to another. What is special about doing a canoeing trip in Lake Superior is that you carry all your equipment in the canoe, but then to go from lake to lake, you have to actually carry your canoe and all the equipment through these portages from lake to lake. In addition to that, you have to carry everything with you for the duration of stay, which was 1 week in our case. Now you may wonder, what am I thinking about being on vacation about CTO PCI? And I think you're right, maybe I'm too obsessed about how to perform interventions, but nevertheless, here are the 15 lessons that I think apply to performing CTO PCI. The first one is planning. Doing a backcountry canoe trip was something I had never done before, and similar to CTO PCI, if you have not done this before, or complex PCI, you want to really plan as carefully as you can. This can be done by reading various books, looking on the web, talking to people who have been there, and creating checklists so you make sure that all the equipment you need, or at least the majority of it, you have it when you actually get there. Another lesson I had is the importance of not procrastinating. Given that there was no cell phone reception there, we decided to buy a Garmin device. Explorer SC actually can send a SOS message in case something went seriously wrong. But I delayed in activating the service, and by the time I wanted to do it, which was a couple days before the departure, the Garmin website was down due to a malware attack, and actually I was not able to get the SOS feature. It was still useful as a GPS tracker, but this is an example of having done this earlier would have allowed us to have the option of calling SOS. The same thing applies to CTO PCI. Don't procrastinate learning the techniques you may need. Don't procrastinate doing the undergrade dissection re-entry, learning the retrograde, because you never know when you're actually going to need those techniques. The next lesson is the importance of training. That's obviously true for everything. In this particular case, we ran with the kids around the lake for several months prior, did some exercise training. The same for CTO PCI. The more you do, the better you get, and the easier it's going to be. The fourth lesson is about the equipment. The one thing we did right is getting sturdy boots, which were critical in portaging the canoes and the equipment from lake to lake, and also wool socks and wool underwear that kept things moving along. However, where I failed is getting the right long sleeve shirts, so mosquitoes were getting crazy, as well as long pants, waterproof pants, to prevent all that. So having the right equipment will make the trip more comfortable. Same for CTO or complex PCI. Having the right guide wire, having the right microcatheter, all these things can make a big difference when you're confronted with a complex situation. The next lesson is about reading the instructions, and this came from this device. This is a water filter, since all the water was from the lakes and we had to filter it before using it. The very first day, we had actually a malfunction, could not make the filter work, which is obviously something of critical importance. And then, of course, read the instructions, which say that before you start filtering, you have to de-air the filter. Same for doing PCI. How many of us actually look at the instructions for use of the various equipment that we use? Microcatheters, wire protection devices. I actually did a review recently, writing the manual of PCI, of several of the manuals of various devices, and it is amazing how much you learn looking at the available and published manuals for every device. So read the instructions. You may learn many things that can be critical as de-airing the water filter in our case. The sixth lesson is about the importance of learning. Doing something new provides ample opportunities for learning new skills. Probably the most stressful part of the trip was hanging the bag at the end of the day, because there are black bears in the Boundary Waters. That was something that I had never done before, and that was not as easy as one might have imagined. Although I had extensively read about it in various posts and books, doing it is actually completely different. I finally learned that you have to get the rope over a branch, but to do this you need a fairly large rock, because if you put a small rock, then it keeps hanging on the tree. If it's one that's too heavy, then it's hard to throw over the tall branches. So just learning how to select the best stone and actually tie the knot around it was something very important. There's also a need for improvisation, and there's nothing more true for complex PCI, where no patient is the same exactly as other patients that we've done. Again, going back to the bear hanging, I very soon had a lot of tear and a lot of injury in my hands, because there was a small wire, a very tight wire, and it was rubbing against my hands. And then our youngest son had this idea about wrapping the wire around the oar and use the oar as the means to lift the bear band. And that was actually a revelation that saved my hands from the injury caused by the bear bag wire. So there's always room for improvisation and doing things better, and necessity essentially makes people get inventive. Lesson number 8 is that not everything has to be pretty. This is an example, getting the canoe from lake to lake. This is not the most elegant way to get the canoe up. It's actually fairly comical how I have no clue, obviously, about getting the canoe up. And at this point, I was actually fairly tired portaging and canoeing, but you know, eventually the job is done. It's a little painful, but finally the canoe gets up there, and off we go into the trail. So it doesn't have to be pretty, everything, but the goal is to get the job done one way or another. And the same thing for CTO PCI, perfection is sometimes the enemy of the good. Number 9, it will be hard and you will get bruised. And that's true for portaging, and that's also true for complex PCI. In addition to getting the canoe, I had to go back and then get 2 backpacks. One's about 70 pounds with all the food, the other about 30 or 40 pounds. So here I was with about 100 pounds of weight going up to a mile portages. That was not the best part. Also, there was a lot of mud, and getting through the mud was challenging, especially since the kids had no intention to be there. And also one of the other parts of the trip that was challenging is all the mosquitoes and how to protect one from the mosquito. So it will be hard, but the bottom line is you have to have the stamina and the persistence to get through until the mission is accomplished. Lesson number 10 is about asking for help. And this is going to happen. The weather did get bad during some of the days we were there, and there was thunderstorms coming. And actually during one of those storms, we stopped next to a campsite. Another very friendly family gave us shelter and gave us some directions about where to go next. So talking to people is critical. Asking for the help of people is critical, both when backpacking in the Boundary Waters, but also when doing complex PCI. We quite often will call for another partner in the room to get advice on what to do next, or even call other friends, other experienced operators on the phone and get their advice about what to do in a challenging situation. Think first, then act. I must say, although sometimes people advocate that in cases of emergency you should act first, then think, I think in the vast majority of cases, thinking first is the way to go. This was an example where we were in a lake and it was getting dark and we could not actually find any place to camp for the night, which is a major problem. And we were paddling frantically, going from place to place, and eventually dawned to us that we should do the portage and go to the next camping site, which was actually the solution. And that brings us to number 12, which is that the more difficult the portage, the less crowded the campsites. This was a long lake, the Windsor Lake, and we were planning to camp along that lake. However, every single campsite was taken. because it turns out this is close to an entry point. So all these campsites were taken. Well, no problem, we crossed over the portage and we figured we will stay in this lake. Well, sure enough, all the campsites in that lake were taken as well. And it was only after the advice of some people we met, told us that there was an open campsite in the next lake, and after a 92-rod portage, which is about 1 kilometer, we were actually able to find shelter at 6:30 to 7 p.m., close to the dusk. And this is very true also for CTO PCI and complex PCI. It turns out most people don't want to do these complex procedures, so if this becomes your skill set and you're good at it, you're going to be busy. You are going to have a lot of referrals because, again, these are complex procedures with high risk, and not everyone wants to tackle these procedures, and they will be happy to refer them to you. The next lesson is the importance of keeping the troops happy, and whether that's the family or whether this is the cath lab staff, this is very important. Sometimes we did want to move and gain some ground, but the kids wanted to play and catch the frogs and climb the little mountains and, of course, put fire at the end and catch some crayfish. It is important to keep the troops happy, keep both the team in the backpacking hut, but also in the cath lab. Make sure you treat everyone respectfully and get their opinions and keep them in good mood so they can go through these long, often procedures. Number 14, get up early and go to bed early. This is true both for protecting from mosquitoes that came out with a vengeance at night, but also early things are calmer, there's less wind, and it's much easier to go places. Same thing for complex PCI. Starting early in the day gives you more time and less stress to be done on time and without complications. It is not the optimal thing to start a complex CTO PCI at 6 p.m. in the evening where everyone is tired, and if something goes wrong, most of the staff of the hospital are already home. So early in the morning is important for starting time, both for backpacking as well as for CTO PCI. And last but not least, be grateful you can do this. I was very grateful. I was able to see all this beautiful nature, lots of exercise, the sky. This was the site for one of our lunch times in a small island in the middle of the lakes. Beautiful flowers, beautiful scenery. We should not forget that we are privileged to be doing complex procedures and help the patients and move the needle forward and make a real importance in their lives. There's a lot of satisfaction in being able to help others using the skills we gain through practice over the years. In the end, doing a backpacking trip in the Boundary Waters does have a lot of similarities with doing CTO or complex PCI, and the reason is that both of these activities are part of life. And life has some variations, but also many similarities, and that is why the lessons learned from one activity in life do apply, for the most part, to other activities in life, such as complex PCI. So in summary, there were many lessons learned during this trip that apply to every new endeavor, including complex and CTO PCI, and I hope you find this useful in gleaning the important lessons for your practice and your backpacking trips. Thank you.